Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our next installment of the Costume Society of America's Oral History series, where we sit down with one of our esteemed members to learn about their career in dress and their relationship with CSA. Past examples can be found on our YouTube channel, where this conversation will also be made available. I'm Katie Baker-Jones, and I have the honor of serving as Vice President of Internal Relations. In this installment, we will be hearing from Dr. Sheryl Farnan, who was elected to the 2022 class of Costume Society of America Fellows. She will be interviewed by Dr. Sara Marcketti. Please allow me now to introduce Sara. Sara Marcketti became a member of Costume Society of America in 2001 while a graduate student at the University of Georgia. A graduate of Iowa State University's PhD program in textiles and clothing, Dr. Marcchetti's involvement in CSA most recently included serving as president 2018 to 2020. A fellow of CSA, class of 2020, Sara currently serves as assistant provost and executive director of the Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching at Iowa State University. Welcome, Sara.
Thank you so much, Katie. I really appreciate that introduction and your service to Costume Society of America. It gives me great pleasure to introduce and have this conversation with Sheryl Farnan. Sheryl has been a CSA member since 2001, and her involvement in our organization has ranged from regional and national leadership, early service on the Midwest Board of Directors, one term as VP External Affairs, serving as our treasurer from 2013 to 2018, and then most recently as president. Sheryl was president during a very trying time during COVID and was one of the main supporters of our CSA Conversations on Dress series. All of her involvement has made my nomination and her receipt as fellow a complete no-brainer. She has really contributed in so many ways to our organization. Sheryl and I first worked most closely together as co-chairs of Crossroads from Cowhide to Couture, the 36th annual CSA National Symposium in Kansas City. I will tell you, if you really want to get to know someone's character, co-host a national symposium with them. Unlike some fellows whose route through their careers has been very straightforward, Sheryl has been fortunate enough to have varied experiences in academia and the business world. Originally from Missouri, Sheryl has a BS from the University of Missouri, an MBA from Rockhurst University, and a PhD from Iowa State. That is actually where I met Sheryl, as we shared major professor Gene Parsons and Jane Farrell Beck. Sheryl transitioned into the PhD program from a rich career in advertising, marketing, and management. She has had a 20+ year career at Metropolitan Community College, where she has taught across the curriculum from merchandising to dress history to pattern design. If you ever want to know something about a topic, I'd encourage you to ask Sheryl because she has taught them all. In addition to her excellence in teaching, Sheryl is also a notable textbook author, bringing 21st century information and relevance to mainstays in the apparel curriculum. I bet many of you have either used these books or are very familiar with them. As one supporter wrote in her CSA Fellow nomination, Sheryl's enthusiasm for the field is obvious and infectious. She cares deeply about her organization and has dedicated a tremendous amount of time and energy to make sure we not only survive, but also thrive.
How are you? I am so humbled by that wonderful introduction. I almost didn't recognize myself. Thank you so much.
Well, it's all true. Well, Sheryl, I have come to this theory and this philosophy that those of us who are really interested in fashion in our careers have early roots, early histories. And I wanted to ask you, what is maybe one of the earliest memories of your interest in fashion that you think maybe propelled you into this career?
It's, when we were first talking about the questions, I started thinking about that. There's like 4 things that happened all at once in my life. If representation counts for anything, I should be a telephone operator a salesperson, or Nancy Drew, because those were the three career influences in my life during my very early formative years. So how did I get interested in fashion? So there was a perfect storm of things that were happening in my life. So our neighbor, Betty Baker, she was she came of age during World War II and loved fashion, and knew a lot about what was going on. The Kansas City area had had a huge fashion industry, garment making industry, from the late 1800s all the way up through World War II and past it. And she was an enthusiastic consumer of all of the products that we created in the Kansas City area. And she used to talk about all the furs that she owned and the jewelry that she owned and the shoes and how it all came together and how women interacted with fashion during times when the Depression was going on. And I just loved her stories. She was just this wonderful character. Two doors down from her was Lee Stanley, who was a pattern designer for Lee jeans. And she could sew anything. And I was just fascinated with her stories. And she would, go off to work, design patterns, come back. She would talk very routinely about, working in the design and pattern making room at Lee. And I thought, boy, this just sounds like a great way to earn a living. At the same time, my grandmother lived with us when I was growing up. And my grandmother was a Depression era Renaissance woman. She could do anything. She could sew without patterns. She had 6 kids that she needed to keep fed and clothed. And she would talk about how she would take flour sacks and cut out pants and shirts and dresses for her 5 boys and her daughter, my mother. And and she could just do anything. She crocheted, she tatted, she embroidered, and in her elder years, she would sit in our home and she would do these crafts, and I was fascinated by them. And my other sisters weren't interested, but I would say, "Teach me, teach me, teach me." And so, from a really early age, like from 6, I was learning how to crochet, learning how to tat, learning how to embroider. And my mother, who throws away nothing, still has little scraps of all these things that I did when I was 5, 6, 7 years old. Now, I don't want to give away my age because I copped to no older than 39, but there was this toy that came out the same year I was born, and her name was Barbie. And so you take the perfect storm of of Betty Baker and Lee Stanley and their fascination with fashion on our suburban street in Kansas City, Missouri, and my grandmother, and Barbie. And then you mix that into the fact that I grew up in a multi generational household and with one TV, one television, and so to alleviate any fights over what would be on TV after school, my mom would turn on the 3 o'clock movie on Channel 5. And it was an old movie from the golden eras of the 30s and the 40s and into the 50s. And I was absolutely fascinated by the costumes. And I would ask Mrs. Baker and Mrs. Stanley, how did they do that? How do you cut fabric to get it to do that? And from the time I was about 7 or 8, all the way up until I was 13, these influences were just alive in just my growing up. Um, on top of that, I was a Girl Scout, and our Girl Scout leader, Sandy Sprudy, hated camping. God, she's like, this is nonsense. You girls do not need to know how to build a fire with sticks and stones. You need to learn how to order off a menu and check into a Marriott. Those are your survival skills for your future. And so that was my Girl Scout upbringing, and she loved to craft. And so, where other kids were taking hikes and learning how to puff a tent, we were learning how to embroider dish towels or make candles, or all this doing and making in our Girl Scout troop. So that was my little perfect storm. So I was never going to be a scientist, uh, or try to figure out how to send anything to the moon. I was going to be a maker. That is I constantly had questions about how do you make that? How do you do that? And we had a sewing store in our shopping center. It's called Singer Sewing Store, and they taught sewing lessons. So I had, I think, seventh and eighth grade. Those summers, I went and took sewing lessons. And my first summer, I won third prize, and the second summer, I won first prize. And I thought, I must be pretty good at this. So that just became a direction for me. And so I hope I'm not over answering the question, but there were just a lot of influences coming my way that I grasped onto that were things that, I liked to do. And when I realized that maybe there were, ways to make this a career, when I got into high school, that was the direction that I headed, trying to figure out how to turn these skills and interests into something where I could earn a living. Still didn't know what a fashion designer was, except through maybe some movies that I saw that depicted fashion designers. But but that was where I became interested in clothing as maybe something I would do in my living.
That makes so much sense now, Cheryl. What your dissertation and your research area focused on was in the 1930s and the 1940s. So it's really clear those influences really, really stayed with you.
I would say that's true. You have people that they become kind of the voices in your ear as you go through your career, um, and I would definitely say that listening to my grandmother talk about what life was like during the Depression and the war, and then on the flip side, Mrs. Baker's more fabulous, glamorous stories about life during the war, and um, uh, it just became very, very, and then all these movies that I would watch as a kid growing up that were made in the 30s and 40s during the war, it just really became something very interesting to me, something that I was able to learn a lot about at an early age and build on. So that was kind of the basis of my scaffold.
And now, Cheryl, you did not go straight into the fashion career, though, did you? After your undergraduate and your master's of business degree, can you tell us a little bit about the different path that your career took?
Yeah, so I am the daughter of a working mother, and the work ethic was always really important to us. So as interesting as kind of a creative artistic career might have been, my dad he had a rule. He said, "I want you to go to college, and I want you to study whatever you're going to study, but you're not going to go to New York," which I had learned about FIT, and that was where I wanted to go. You're going to go to a school in Missouri. So study whatever you want, but you're going to go to school in Missouri. And so I went to University of Missouri. I looked at various schools. At that time, there were fashion programs in 3 or 4 schools in the state of Missouri, but I thought University of Missouri had the best program for what I wanted to do. I've always also been interested in keeping my options wide, and they had a strong business component attached to their home economics based program. So even not really knowing what I was getting myself into, that seemed like something that would be valuable to me. Um, so I got my degree in home economics, and I graduated in December of 1984. And I had a goal that I set. I'm very goal oriented. I'll set a goal, and that's what I'll work towards. My goal was to have a job by the time I walked down the aisle at graduation. And one of the major employers here in Kansas City for young teenagers is a company called Worlds of Fun. It's a theme park. And I originally went to go get a job in their costume department. And uh, so I went in and I interviewed and I said, yeah, I'd like to work in your costume department. I'm really interested in costume design and clothes. And, they had, I'd been out there as a kid and they had show productions and all these wonderful costumes um, in all these different live shows and live entertainment that they put on. And they said, great. So they stamped my little form and told me to go around the corner and get in the next line. And I did, but I got in the wrong line. and I wound up in the merchandising department. And so they they looked at after I'd gotten hired, and they told me that my job was the balloon girl. I would be walking the balloons around the park. I said, wait a minute, I thought I was going to be in the costume department. And they looked at my paper and said, you got in the wrong line. And they said, well, do you want to work in costumes, or do you want to work in the balloon as a balloon walker? And the other girl that I would be working with, she seemed really fun and nice. And I was 16 years old, and I thought, okay, I'll be a balloon walker. So that launched my merchandising career right there, getting in the wrong line when I was getting hired at my summer job. And I really had a great time. So I did. I was a balloon walker, and you walk all over the park and you get to know everybody. I got to know everybody. I got to know every director, every manager, and I would talk to them, and they said, we want you to manage a store. So I managed one of the shops, and then they brought me up into the office, and I worked as the summer coordinator in the office, and I staffed uh, uh, workers into the different, I just staffed the kids into the different stores. I did cash control training. I did merchandising training. And I was just kind of a girl Friday, just all kinds. I loved it. Never a dull moment in that job. Um, and then that kind of took me all through high school and my first year or two in college. And then um, after college started, I went and became a supervisor over at a park, over at a second park that we had started, a water park, Oceans of Fun. If anybody's familiar with the Midwest, these are two big entertainment areas that we have. Um, when I was getting ready to graduate, the head of marketing came to me and said, so what are your plans after graduation? And I said, well, I'm going to go to New York. I've been accepted to this new graduate program that they have at FIT, and I'm going to go there and go to graduate school. And they said, well, why don't you come to work for us in marketing, and we'll send you to graduate school. And I thought, okay, you're going to pay for me to go to graduate school. Okay, that's great. I will do that. So I scrapped the idea of going to graduate school, accepted the job in marketing, and here's the deal. I have to tell you this because the Chiefs are in the Super Bowl on Sunday, and I am a huge Chiefs fan. This is our Chiefs cave that I'm sitting in, and there's a giant shrine over here for the game on Sunday. So my job was the owner of World's Fun was Lamar Hunt, who was also the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs. But in the 80s, they were so bad, they couldn't get anybody to come to a football game. And so my first job out of college was selling group sales tickets to Worlds of Fun, to the Royals, and to the Kansas City Chiefs. And I couldn't get, and now I just think you can't get a ticket to a Chiefs game to save your soul, and they're in the Super Bowl, and it's so exciting. But that was my very first job out of college. Nothing fashion related at all. Marketing, business. I learned how to pull a spreadsheet together. I learned what the bottom line was. I learned that the best ideas in the world are great ideas, but if they are not going to make money for your company, forget about it and move on and find something that's going to make money, or figure out how to take your great idea and monetize it. That was what I cut my teeth on. Am I answering your question? Uh, that took me. I think you were asking me how I kind of swerved out of the fashion industry and or out of a fashion interest and into other kinds of uh, other kinds of careers. So I worked in group sales for 2 years, and after that I went to work for a pharmaceutical company for a year, and that was where I learned, how to walk into an office and ask to talk to somebody about it was all cold calling, all of it. You did not make appointments with these doctors. You walked in and you lurked around until you could grab one by the collar button, tell them about your drug, leave samples, and come back. And it was all about relationship building and being somebody that somebody did not want to throw out of an office, and just being friendly and taking an interest. So I learned some important skills there. I did that for a year, and an opportunity came open for me to work for Hallmark Cards. And Hallmark Cards is also based here in Kansas City. It's at the time it was a greeting card company, and wrapping paper and party goods. So they were very much into physical items that you would use for social expression. But they realized pretty soon that they were gonna top out, and so they started to build a wider footprint into other kinds of industries. And many people might know them now from the Hallmark channels and the movies and the media that they are putting out there, and that's become a really big part of their business. So I worked for them for 13 years. And my job was to manage a program that they had called Kaleidoscope. And Kaleidoscope was a program that was started by Mr. Hall uh, because he needed creative talent to come and help him make his products, greeting cards and wrapping paper and all of those kinds of items. And he knew that kids are taught art in school, and then at some point the crayons are taken out of their hand and they're told that they have to do more serious kinds of pursuits. You have to study math, you have to study science, don't mess around with the art. And there were a lot of really talented people that were not being channeled into art schools. As a result, uh, funding was dropping out. By the 80s and into the 90s, funding was bottoming out in the school districts for creative education. Music and art programs were losing their funding. And so he said, let's go in and do our own program. And we will take this program around to cities and help people understand at a grassroots level what the importance of creativity is. And so I ran that program. I ran it for 5 years full time, and then I stayed on 8 more years as a consultant as they started to work and build the program out in different ways. Um, and I loved that job. It was 100% travel. I traveled everywhere. I wore out about 6 sets of suitcases. And that was where I learned that black goes with everything. And my entire wardrobe became black. I almost became the anti-fashion person. But circling back to my interest in fashion, I was in all of these wonderful cities, and my fun thing I would do would be to go shopping. I would go shop. I would um, buy fabric. I didn't buy clothes because, again, I was traveling all the time. Everything had to kind of match. Everything was black, but I would buy fabric, and I still have tons of it. I have like 7 cabinets full of fabric. So if anybody needs some fabric for something, talk to me. I'm I'm serious. I'm really trying to rehome about, I don't know, 80,000 yards of fabric. So if you need some fabric, let's talk. Um, I would buy fabric. And just yards and yards of it, and I would put it in boxes and ship it back. And I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I became a serious fabric stasher. And I thought, this is crazy. I thought I was having some kind of weird, demented behavior, and uh, but I just still did it because I thought it was so beautiful, and it made me feel like I was connected to this love of fashion and sewing and design that I wasn't able to really participate in because I was on the road all the time. And so when I left that job and uh, landed back in Kansas City full time and worked at it part time as a consultant, I started a sewing business. And I did bridal, prom, and it was really fun. I loved it. But by the 90s, custom sewing was kind of on the downswing, and people were more interested in decorating their homes. And I started to get more commissions to do interior work, like making drapes and pillows and things like that for the home. So after about, I don't know, about 10 years, I just started to phase out of doing that. But I was starting to come full circle and try to figure out how do I bring this love of fabric, of sewing, of design kind of back around into my um, into my career. So a few other things happened, but um, I worked for a hospital, so the pharmaceutical sales kind of brought itself back into my life, and I worked in marketing for a hospital firm for about 5 years while I had this sewing business. And then I was recruited away by an advertising agency, and I had some interesting clients there. I worked for Serengeti Sunglasses, worked for Lee Jeans, and I worked for Cerner, I had all kinds of clients. And I did that for about 2 years, and that was where I really learned about client service. I learned how advertising production really works, how communication really needs to work in an advertising program, and how communication needs to happen to a large swath of people. Uh, you can't just say anything that you want to say. You have to be respectful of the fact that whoever's going to buy your product comes from a lot of different places in their background, and you have to cast as wide a net as possible. My writing skills really started to punch up there. We had a great graphics team, but when something needed to be written, we had one guy who was the writer, and it was just too much for him. And so whenever we needed to do a white paper or a position statement or presentations, I would just go ahead and start knocking out copy or knocking out an outline, and I would submit it and say, this is at least a start. Let's start here. And our creative director said, you've got some chops here. You can really get the words on paper fast. And I said, well, I really do enjoy writing. When I was in high school, I was really directed towards getting into a career in journalism, but I wanted to study home economics, and I wanted to study fashion, and I wanted to work with fabric. So someone said, put writing into your job, but don't necessarily feel like you have to pursue writing as a career. Writing is a part of everything that we do. So that was where I really started to write. And I really became very interested in writing. And I wanted to write better. And I knew that the kind of writing I was doing was um, very terse, very to the point. And I thought, how do I make this bigger? So I started looking for writing classes, and I started looking for ways to expand the skill. You don't know what you don't know. I just knew that there were things out there that I read that were in a different style than the kind of writing I was doing, and I wanted to learn how to do that. So all this comes kind of full circle when I met my husband, and he said, and we'd gotten engaged, and he said, I have an offer for a job in Des Moines. And I said, oh, well, are you going to come back on weekends then? How are you going to do this? And he said, no, you're going to move with me. We're going to buy a house and you're going to move with me. And I said, are you kidding me? So I had front row seats on the 50-yard line at Arrowhead, season tickets at this time. Big Chiefs fan. And I said, no. And he said, it's only 2 hours up I-35. It's not that far away. We'll come back for the Chiefs games. We'll come back and see your family as much as you want to. It's gonna be fine. And I said, okay, if I can find a job, I will sell the house and I'll move up there. But if I can't find a job, we're gonna have to rethink this. And I said, okay. So I went up and I looked around, and I got 2 job offers. Actually, I got 3 job offers. So I got a job offer at John Deere to work in their in-house advertising. I didn't know anything about tractors, but I did know advertising. So I entertained that offer. I also got an offer at Blue Cross and Blue Shield And that was very interesting. And it was in government affairs, which was in an area that I had not worked in previously. And so I thought, okay, this is interesting. And while I was kind of interviewing for those positions, I had noticed this job for an academic advisor at Iowa State University. And I thought, and they wanted somebody who had a degree in home economics. And I thought, well, I have a degree in home economics, and I think being an academic advisor would be fun. And maybe if I get onto a campus and have a job in that kind of world, maybe I could start to work on my doctorate. That would be something I'd always kind of had in the back of my mind that I would like to do. And earning a doctorate would also help me with my writing, because that was still something that I was interested in focusing on. And, all I can say is say your goals out loud, put out in the world what you want, and the universe will hear you, and things will come to you that help you reach your goals, because it did. There's no way in the world I would have gone out on my own and said, you know what, being an academic advisor is going to be a fun way for me to, get it. Uh, it just sort of happened that way. So I went and I interviewed for this job. And And Jean, I saw that you're on here. Jean was in this meeting. So I get in this interview for this job as an academic advisor. And the question is, why are you interested in this job? And so I said, because I'm interested in getting a doctorate, and I'm thinking that this kind of job might put me in a place where that's something I could actually do. You're interested in getting your doctorate? And yes, and I said, I did apply. I've actually applied to the graduate program. Well, it's the same. I didn't understand how universities worked, but as it turned out, we all know how universities work now. It's the same team of people who were on the academic advisor hiring committee who were also on the selection team for graduate students. So I went into the interview applying for a job as an academic advisor, and I came out as a graduate student. And there was a little bit more to that story than that. That's basically the upshot of it. And I told my husband, I said, I think I would like to go and work work on my PhD. I will be able to get an assistantship that will help pay for it. I had no student loans left from my master's degree or my undergraduate degree. And he said, go for it. So I did. That was it. And I went back to Kansas City. I resigned from my job. We put the house on the market. We bought a house in Des Moines. We moved, and I never looked over my shoulder again. Never had any regrets. And I never said, I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in advertising or gone back to Hallmark, or, it was just straight ahead. I knew it was the very best decision for me. And just helped me develop a whole different set of skills that I had not really been able to use in the positions that I had had prior to this. And I loved it. So I think that answers maybe the third question too. How did I launch into a PhD program? It was all at one time, very well calculated, because I had always positioned myself academically to perhaps be able to do this at some time in my life. But when the opportunity presented itself, it came really out of nowhere. It was just, I'm I'm here. We're moving here for my husband's job. This is something I want to do. Great, let's do it. And so, but I knew it was the right decision immediately. I didn't have to really think about it.
Well, and what a great time, right, to do your PhD with Jean and with Jane Farrell Beck. And I know there were so many opportunities for research, for teaching, even in administrative areas, right? It was just a really great time to
Oh,
be
it was
getting your
wonderful. It was great.
doctorate.
Sarah, we had, gosh, how many graduate students were there with us? There were 15 or 20 from all over the world. We made friends with other students from India. There had been a group from, oh gosh, I think Russia or Bosnia that had just left as we were coming in. I didn't get to know them very well, but I got acquainted. Um, there were it was a great time to study, um, and uh, and so my first assistantship was in the historic costume area, and Jennifer Shuley and I worked in the costume area, and our main job was to pull artifacts and costumes for faculty when they would bring the students through to show them examples of things for the classes. Best job I ever had, and that was how I really got interested in costume history. I'd always had this leaning towards the 30s and the 40s because of all the movies and the costumes and the people that I knew that had these great experiences that they shared with me. But that was when I had the first hands-on um, experience actually working with artifacts. And Jennifer taught me a lot. Jane taught me a lot. Jean taught me a lot. And so I knew that was the part of apparel and textiles that I really wanted to focus on.
Sheryl, can you talk a little bit about Costume Society of America and maybe some of your favorite memories of the organization, either at the Midwestern region or the national region, or things that really stick out to you when you think about your involvement with CSA?
Yeah, so Sarah, you're my CSA buddy. So I can't even talk about CSA without talking about you. And um, so Sarah and I were grad school um, buddies together. I think you came in one semester after me. And so we were there at the same time, taking the same classes, kind of moving through the program the same way. Both had history focus. And Sarah, I'm going to tell you right now, is a hard worker. This woman can crank work out. I mean, like top-notch work out like nobody you have ever seen. And I get this phone call from Kay Boyer, who was our executive director and I'd been in CSA. I think I had just graduated. We had just moved to Kansas City, and I had just started a new job with MCC, uh, coordinating the apparel and textiles program. And I had two kids by this time, and I was just buried. I mean, just buried. And I hadn't gotten tenure yet, and I was still about 3 years away from getting tenure. I get a call from Kay Boyer. She says, we'd like to bring the symposium to Kansas City. I'd like to talk to you about possible options for um, program coordinators. I'm like, I don't really know anybody, but okay, let's talk. So we talked, and she said, well, we'd like for you to consider being a program coordinator. You're the only member in Kansas City. I'm like, that's how I got the job, huh? Because I'm the only member in Kansas City. And I said, I'm not sure. I don't, I kind of hemmed and hawed, but I thought, okay, nothing good ever happened to me from saying no. So I'm just going to say yes and see where it goes. I have no idea what I'm doing. I think I had only been to one CSA conference. So I honestly didn't really have a feel for what this event really looked like from a member's perspective. I'd only been to one. But I thought, okay, I'll say yes. And they said, don't you need a co-chair. So is there anybody else you know? And it didn't take me 3 seconds. I'm going to call Sara Marcketti. So, and honestly, Sarah, I actually expected you to say no because I probably would have myself. But you didn't, and you didn't even have to think about it that long. So from the top note, Sarah and I were co-program coordinators of the 2010 CSA Symposium in Kansas City, and it rocked. It was great. We did everything we were supposed to do, got our committees together, and we did it so far in advance that by the time it came time to actually execute, everybody had gotten new jobs, moved on, done something else, and our committees all fell apart. So at the last minute, we're putting tours together, and literally it's my knowledge of Kansas, growing up in Kansas City. I'm just like, okay, we're going to take them here. We're going to go there. But here's where this is the favorite. It is the weekend that the executive committee wants to come and take a look at Kansas City, and they weren't that thrilled about it. So they were going to do kind of a conference call thing because Kansas City, it's kind of in the middle, and they weren't really sure what they were going to do. So they decided that it would be Kay King, who was the president, and Kay Boyer, who's the executive director, and I think Jackie Field, and you and me. And we were going to do the pre-site visit a couple of days advance, and then the rest of the executive team was going to come out. So you and I put together the funnest day. We were going to take everybody on it. We were going to take Jackie and Kay on a tour of Kansas City in my car. And then we were going to take them to lunch on the plaza. And then we were going to take them to the Nelson Art Gallery for a tour of the Chinese exhibit and the Impressionistic exhibit. And then we were going to take them to dinner at Majestic Steakhouse, which has a speakeasy in the basement from the 1920s. And they told everybody else on the executive committee what they were going to be doing that day on the site visit, and everybody decided to come along. And do you remember we had to rent a bus and drive everybody around in a bus, and I got to be the bus driver that day. And that is one of my favorite memories because Kansas City's the best kept secret. Everybody thinks, oh, ho hum, in the middle. It's a great city. And if you give yourself a chance to come here, they were just bowled over. They were so excited. It generated so much buzz for the symposium, and we had a really successful event here. And I think and after that, I've just never been able to say no to anything that CSA asked me to do. So that's one of my favorites.
And we're thankful you never said no, because you've been involved with vice president external, treasurer. I know your time as treasurer was very important for Costume Society of America as we went through some difficult financial times. And you really helped spearhead us to have books that were transparent, and your business background definitely helped put us right into the black.
Well, that is generous of you. I think as treasurer, it was a time when we were, we were really at a point where we were needing to make some changes in how we were how we not governed, but how we administered ourselves. And I going to be very diplomatic in what I say here. We had moved away from an excellent executive director who had decided to retire into a management company, and they were very good, but our organization and their organization just didn't have the same. We didn't have this. We didn't feel that we didn't see eye to eye on how to go about running an organization. So we needed to separate from them. And what was challenging was that, with all the business education that you have, you think you're asking the right questions, you think you're doing the right things, but you don't know what you don't know. And it wasn't until we actually pulled the management away from the company that we were working with, and Kathy Mullet and Judy Matei and I set up a triumvirate, kind of a checks and balances group to pay the bills. And we realized exactly how much money goes out of the organization, exactly how much money came into the organization. We kept it rolling financially in terms of just making sure bills were paid for about 8 to 10 months. And in doing so, we really had a roll your sleeves up knowledge of the day-to-day of the organization. And we were able to much more intelligently then figure out what our next step needed to be. It was a lot more straightforward than we thought, and it was not nearly as complicated as we thought it was. Now, we have gotten much more complex in our finances. We now have an endowment which has many layers to it. We have many more programs than we had. We fund grants and awards and honors in a different way than we used to. So our administration has grown much more complex, but I am telling you, it is so much more transparent. Kristen has done an absolutely marvelous job of bringing the books and our income statement and our balance sheet into a way that we can actually understand. It's not convoluted. There's not a lot of double talk. When we ask questions, we get answered. And it has really helped us grow as an organization and bring on so much more than we had 5 or 6 years ago, even.
Absolutely. I think you've had such a varied career. I wondered if you could maybe give advice to those thinking about writing a book. You have 3 very successful textbooks under your belt. I know they're co-authored. They were already established books, but you definitely came on and gave them new life. But what advice would you have for those really interested in writing either textbooks or popular press books?
So Emily Samolsky, who's the acquisitions editor at Fairchild, she and I sat at a conference, and she asked me, she goes, "How do you do it?" Because I work pretty fast, and I said it's a job, and a lot of times when people look at writing as a career, they look at it as an artistic endeavor, and it definitely can be, but words have power, and they it we have a certain thought process, and sometimes when you put the words down the way you're thinking of them, you're not getting the thought across the way that you think you are when you're just conceiving the words. So it's important to write your thoughts down. But I told her, I said, I think of this like a job. I set up a schedule. I set up intermittent goals. So the publisher usually gives you a year to work to get a revision done. And that's too long for me. And the fashion industry moves way too fast. The last revision I did was during COVID, and I'm going back and I'm working on a revision project now. And it's all the companies are gone. They've reorganized. Companies have gone out of business. It just changes so fast. Do you can't take the luxury of a full year for a revision, because by the time you get the last chapter done, the first chapter needs to be redone again. Um, so I try to go through the first revision in 3 months, and I set it up a chapter a week. Boom, 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 boom. And most of my 2 of the books have 12 chapters, one has 18. So I can do 1 chapter a week, get the images updated, get the references updated, change any copy that needs to be changed, rewrite anything, and I can get that done in the first 12 to 15 weeks. And then I can take another couple of weeks to do all the ancillary stuff, like the glossary and the opening pages and things like that that need to be done. I like to do all my own photo work. So if we need to redo photos, I like to go in and pick them out myself. Um, and because I think photos are a very important part of how we tell that story. And students need to be able to look at a photo and see an example of something that they can't see in their classroom. They need to know what the inside of a factory looks like, or what a certain kind of textile looks like. And so the photos are as an important part of the writing as the actual wordsmithing is. Um, I read everything out loud. After I write it, I read it out loud to make sure that it sounds good out loud and not just in my head. And then So treat it like a job, make a schedule, set your deadlines for yourself, and set intermittent deadlines. So if I'm going to get a chapter done a week, what do I need to do? I need to do this much on Thursday, this much on Friday, this much on Saturday, and just work it into your schedule. And it is work. Writing is I read a quote in a book I read recently that said creativity is mainly time in the seat. So you just put yourself in a chair in front of a computer and get busy, and don't get up until you get a certain amount of words on the paper or a certain amount of pages taken care of. That's my advice for writing a book.
Excellent. So many great points coming from this conversation. I love to hear it. I'd really love to hear your perspective on the community college fashion student and the things that you're seeing in community colleges and fashion education, a space that I don't think we talk about enough in Costume Society, though we know that so many of our fashion workers are coming from these spaces, and we'd love to see more people participating in community colleges in these programs. So please, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Sure. So the community college was the great innovation of the late 20th century. And if you look at where most colleges sit, they sit out in some small town out in the middle of a state. It was land grant money that was given, and they usually gave the land that was the cheapest and was the farthest away from major cities and real estate. So that's why we have colleges kind of out in the middle of nowhere. And it was really hard for working adults or maybe people who did not come from a lot of family resources to get higher education. So we built community colleges, which stemmed out of school districts, high school districts, and K through 12 school districts. And it was in the 70s when the concept was first developed, any school district that wanted a community college could have one. So a student could go from senior high school to get their first 2 years of college taken care of, or some training for a career or technical area. And the then traditional disciplines that you found in land grant universities were the mainstay of those community college curriculum. So we saw home economics programs, interior design programs, English, math, science, history, etc. So Penn Valley Community College, which became MCC, Metropolitan Community College, Penn Valley campus, housed the home economics program that had an interior design program, culinary arts program, and a fashion design and merchandising program. And when I came back to Kansas City after graduating from Iowa State, I contacted them and asked them if they still had the program, and they did. They had shed off the interior design and the culinary arts, but they still had the fashion program, and it needed not only a faculty member but a coordinator. And they wanted to completely revamp the program. And I thought, oh my God, this is my dream job right here. I get to run a whole program. And I had Kay King was the president at the time, and I asked her, I said, Kay, what do you think about this? And she said, these programs belong in community colleges. Community colleges offer affordable and accessible education to people who can't afford to go or don't want to, for whatever reason, choose not to go to a university, but yet still need valuable training for the workforce. And the salary levels in most entry-level apparel and merchandising jobs isn't that high. You have to be in about 5 years. You're often working for minimum wage. This is a great way for students to not have to invest tens of thousands of dollars into their education and still get great education and still have a skill and a portfolio to take out into the workplace. So that's how we reframed the program at Penn Valley, was to look at a program that could transfer into a four-year program, but also be a level of completion for students that wanted to stop there. And it was successful. I had students go on to programs throughout the Midwest. I had students move on to programs in Canada, move on to I had a few that went to FIT, a couple who went to FITM. I had a couple of students who went to FITM for a year and then came back home and finished up in our program. And it was, we tried to give our students every kind of experience we could. We have a great retail in Kansas City, and we have the Country Club Plaza, which is a wonderful shopping area, and we had internships with area employers. We still have, we don't have any factories left in Kansas City, but we still have little bits of the apparel industry left, remnants of the bygone days, and some of those businesses were willing to take our students in. And we have a world-renowned fabric designer, textile designer who lives in Kansas City, and she took a few of our students on, Jill McDonald, and she took a few of our students on to as interns in textile design, and so really just opportunities that aren't really apparent. And when I did the In Fashion book, which is geared towards community college and small college programs, we made sure that we put in career spotlights of people who don't work in New York or Los Angeles, but work in other parts of the country. So we can show that there are opportunities all over the place for people who are really interested in pursuing a career.
Excellent. Yes, fashion lives everywhere, as
It
we all
lives
know.
everywhere.
Yeah, and
Yes,
it
it
needs
is.
people to work everywhere. So yes, please, Sarah, back to you.
Thank you, Katie, for the question. Sheryl, we've known each other for so long, and I learned so many things about you. This was just so much fun to hear about your early life and your career changes. And I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you and for you to share your insights with us. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Sarah sent me a list of 5 questions, and I said, oh, we're not going to be able to cover all this because I can talk for hours about school and how important it is, and about fashion and about history. So this has been an absolute treat for me. Thank you so much. I'm so honored.
And I want to thank both you, Sheryl and Sarah, for participating in our oral history tonight. And Sheryl, as a Kansas City gal myself, I'm with you on Sunday. I mean, I don't care much about the football, but I will be happy for my family who is very much into the football. So go Kansas
Yep.
City.
Go
But
Kansas City.
well, so thank you so much for all of our attendees and for those of you watching on our YouTube channel. For more information about our future digital content, publications, and membership, please do visit us at costumesocietyofamerica.com. If you have any questions about today's presentation or future webinars, you can email us at our address there. And do please consider making a contribution to help offset the costs of this series. You can visit us at our contributions page or mail checks to P.O. Box 852 Columbus, Georgia 31902. And don't forget to check us out on our various social media channels. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.